I'm back with another episode of Semi-Pro, and I've brought with me Mauisnake, a man best known for his role as an analyst and broadcast talent during events such as Flashpoint Season 1 at the beginning of 2020, and if you can remember back to the year that we would all like to go back to, at the end of 2019, he was at Epicenter 2019. So welcome to the interview show. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Doing just great. Doing great. It's a wonderful day here in Hawaii.
Of course, yes. And a wonderful night here in the East Coast of the United States, as time zones do remind us. So the main thrust of this interview is that we are talking about the online era of Counter-Strike that's recently kicked into gear. And from my perspective, from my point of view, it hasn't really been kind to the top tier North American teams. Obviously, the biggest one that fell the hardest was Team Liquid. Massive fall off after all of the success that they rode into and sort of got stopped by Astralis in the semifinals of that, or was it quarterfinals? It might have actually been even earlier in the tournament. Yeah, quarterfinals of that, the most recent major that we had, actually. I was about to say, oh yeah, the major, it was this many majors ago, is actually the last one. Because
it's over a year ago.
Yeah.
Over a year ago. Over 365 days ago.
If you can believe it. Yeah, it's crazy. So obviously they had a huge fall off. And then even before the acquisition of Zeus for Evil Geniuses, they were having a tough time of it as well, following the switch into online play. So obviously this is something that I know you have some experience with. And obviously you've been studying the North American scene for quite a while now. So I wanted to come in and pick your brains about it, get your perspective on maybe some key points that you might think are contributing factors to why the North American teams initially struggled. And I mean, even now, it doesn't seem like they're returning to supreme form, although Evil Geniuses has obviously seen an uptick. Maybe you can make an argument for Gen G as well, but obviously, we heard the DAPS news as well. So future uncertain, we'll say. So what do you think about the online era and specifically as it pertains to the North American teams?
Well, I think EG has righted the ship quite a bit. I think the Zeus pickup, I think that might just could be the top move of 2020, actually. It feels like EG is actually firmly the best North American team. They're clearly better than Liquid. They've beaten them a handful of times already. They just beat them yesterday, for their 10 a.m. match, by the way.
Yeah, how dare they?
Yeah, honestly. Maybe we can get into that more later. But yeah, they've done really well lately. Zeus just always seemed like the correct pick. And once they released the comms, actually, for what the things that Zeus is actually saying to this team when they're playing, you understand entirely and immediately why he was the perfect pickup for them. Because Chet, on one hand, I'm a pet, their previous coach, was a great tactical mind and someone that's a demo grinder, and I'm sure he could tell you every single nade combo that goes into a banana take of a team that they're going to be facing off against. But when you're actually in the server, details like that they won't always be cognizant for a player. You're not always going to remember that every last little nade. It's like, okay, so they usually throw the double molly setup, smoke down, and then they 70% of the time will double nade broom, but 30% of the time they're going to double nade logs. Like those kind of things players don't really want to know. From working with most players and from what they've said in interviews, a lot of the fraggers beyond the IGL aren't really going to take into account those minor details. And even a lot of IGLs aren't the greatest at anti-stratting. They don't play until you really reach the top 10 IGLs or so. You're not really going to find people that are consistently able to fuse anti-stratting with their game plan, with a couple execs, and still keep into track like how to be a moral leader and all of that. So I'm a pet, great guy. I'm sure he works really hard, but Zeus is the kind of guy that he brings a little bit of the strategy, but a lot of the morale. And that's exactly the kind of thing you need if you're a team like Evil Geniuses, where you're so momentum focused. When you have Stanislaw calling, you're not actually calling strats. Like you watch an Evil Geniuses game, and they might run 1 to 2 execs in an entire match, whereas where a team that is run by I'm a pet, you would think that they would just have strats out the ass. You'd think they would just be running exec after exec after exec, set play. Here's how they take map control in this perfect nade fashion, whatever. But when you have players like Breeze and when you have players like Cirque, sometimes you want to let them loose. And Zeus is the kind of player that you want, or the kind of coach you want behind you, metaphorically grabbing your shoulder, just pushing you and saying, you guys got this. Like, dude, you guys are the best players in the world. You're easily the best team in North America. I've seen you guys play against you guys so many times now. I know you guys are the best. Like, the things he says to them get them hyped up. And that's why I think that's a big reason why they're winning.
One of the major narratives, I guess, that has been coming out of the online era as well has actually been related to morale, but it's been inverse from what I initially thought would happen. So a lot of teams or a lot of talent, a lot of voices of the scene have said things to the effect of like, these players are playing from their bedrooms. They can get I think Richard Lewis says they can have their mom bring a cup of tea or whatever, like all that stuff. They have all of the creature comforts that you don't normally have on a LAN environment. And obviously the counterpoint to that particular example is the idea that, well, as a result of that change in environment, there's a downside to it, which is players may not take it as seriously. And another extension of this I've noticed has been this other narrative about maybe it's too early to change players or teams or coaches in any capacity because we don't know when the next LANs are coming. And do you want to invest in talent, for example, like Team Liquid investing in Grim recently, unproven on LAN talent in that particular respect? Or do you want to shake up the entire roster with a new coach, with a new vision for the game? What would you say to that particular narrative in general, as far as both the creature comfort aspect of it, of players having their morale attenuated positively or negatively, or in different directions by the fact that they're at home, but also from the perspective of somebody who's trying to, GM the scene and say, do I want to shake up my team or do I want to keep it intact until we have more experience with this stuff, until the LANs come back? What do you think about that?
Right. So, man, I've been consuming so many podcasts lately that I know there was a discussion on one that I was watching recently, and it was like the two. I think they were talking about, who was it? God, it's just slipping my memory. But basically, I remember the host of the podcast and the player that was on it both had two drastically different sides to this equation of what do you do as a GM here? Do you wait for land? It was JW on Reflections. It was JW on Reflections with Moses and JW. I think Thorin and Moses were kind of in the camp that this is a good time to change players. Oh, Moses said this because he's coaching Liquid now. He was saying that this is a good time to change out their players because you can use these upcoming 3 months before hopefully COVID restrictions lighten up for a lot of these teams and LAN start coming back, and you can use this to just be like the ultimate 3-month boot camp that you can just prep so many things that you can just try whatever you want out. And then JW was saying something along the lines of, I would have waited for LANs to come back. And I think, and they both kind of agree that the other person was right. So there's really no correct answer to this question. It really just depends on the situation, and there's so much context. And I hate that I can't really narrow it down and give the hot take here, but it's not as simple as just a binary of, is this a good time to change or is it not a good time to change? I think it really just depends on the context of the team. And I think on a case by case basis, I could answer that. But as a general sweeping statement, really, it just matters how well your team is doing. Is it a lot of like it? I'll say this. I'll try to give it some kind of restrictions or guidelines here. That if it were a top 2 team in the region, I don't think you should change anything. If you're fine, like if you're doing fine, like EG for example, they're a top 2 team. Like I think they just lost to Furia recently. I think that's the most, or something like that's probably the only loss they've had lately. So they're probably competing with Furia for top 2 NA team. Like if they drop and Furia becomes the better team here at this upcoming ESL Pro League season, then sure. Then maybe, I mean, then EG comes to number 2. I don't think they should make any changes because they're still a top 2 team. Don't wait for LANs. But if you're like Liquid, where you're out of that top 2, especially for North America, that is a spot they're supposed to have. They're supposed to be a top 2 team. Then yes, I understand making the changes there. So that's the answer to that question. Going back to your initial one here, the first part of this, which is more about what's the morale standpoint. I think most people can attest to this, that as they are now working in the COVID era, the lockdown era, that when you're at home, the days blend together. It seems like sometimes your work just falls into one idea, falls into the next, and it just feels like this kind of endless chain of just like everything feels the same. And maybe there's some changes in terms of what you're working on necessarily, but at the end of the day, you're lacking in stimulation, you're lacking in social interaction. Like, I can say this, in the last 9 months, there's been no good art that's come out. Like, no one's come out with any good, I'm not even seeing good visual art. Like, things from Vimeo creators that are just naturally good at making videos, Like, sometimes I'll just watch, like, stupid college kid art videos, right? Like, I just, because I know people that used to do that, so I just kind of, like, check out the Vimeo top 10. What is it? But, like, I'm not even seeing good stuff come out of there. Like I'm not seeing good stuff come out of music really. Like everyone's ideas now are really just so confined that I think the same thing falls into place with players as well. I think that players have now, because there's no contrast in their lives. Like even though players are sitting in front of their computers all the time every day, they still always had the option to go outside to get a burger, you know, to eat at a restaurant, to spend some of that money that they have because they're making their 5-figure salaries or whatever it is, you know, monthly.
Right.
Then they have these options to stimulate themselves. But without that, I remember, I think it was Nitro on another podcast was saying something along the lines of how it doesn't feel like he was learning anything anymore. And the thing is, when you're a top tier player, if I hear from my teammate that my teammate's not learning anything, I want that guy cut. Like, unless he's just a god, unless he's like just destroying everybody, like he's simple level, like a top 10 player or something like that, I don't want that kind of player on my team anymore. So, but that, I think that's a trap that a lot of people are falling into right now. Unless you're really taking the time and effort to put in a lot of research and to scout out other regions, because I think this is a really interesting time in Counter-Strike where if you look beyond your region, there's so much to discover now. But if you just are just hyper focused and you're playing like all these top teams in NA, e.g. Liquid, Triumph is even included in this now, Furia, of course, they're all just playing each other over and over and over again, and these games are going to feel so similar, and they just kind of like, it just feels like probably when they win and lose, it just feels like the smallest difference in this game was the reason we lost. It's like, oh, that was such a dumb round, like we got reset on an eco or an anti-eco or something like that. Like that's how it feels right now to be playing. So people aren't really viewing it with the same critical lens that they did prior to COVID. You can still learn a lot if you take from other regions, because regions are now specializing a little bit more. Like I think if you look at, I think the biggest, the most obvious example of this is when you look at EU Valorant versus NA Valorant, and this isn't maybe a Valorant pod, but they're so drastically different in the way that they play and the compositions and their styles that we're starting to see that a little bit. Like the style that Big and Heroic are playing in EU is nothing like any of the NA teams are playing right now. I would argue that it's so much more consistent for online play, the way that they're deciding to take the reins over there, as opposed to NA players who have really fallen into this trap of just like playing this really kind of default centric style a lot of the time.
Well, that is a fear of mine as well, looking at it from a more of a layman's perspective. I look at the way that North American teams, especially the actual English-speaking North American teams, I can say a little bit less about Furia because I haven't watched a lot of their games recently, but I do think that a lot of the North American play I've seen online has almost been a regression to the stuff when we had online leagues before. If you go back a couple of years to when I first really got into the game's pro scene, I noticed that especially online, but just in general, the expectation of North American Counter-Strike was that it would be default centric. They're looking to, use their raw aim, their skill, and, pop heads that way, as opposed to having a more consistent. And as you're saying, when it comes to teams like Big and Heroic with, more heavily utility based teams and setups, strats, more by the numbers Counter-Strike in that particular respect, where they are getting down and, detailed essentially with their plans. I've seen that, North American teams can contest them when they want to, especially on LAN play. And that's pretty much something that we saw proven by Team Liquid. Despite their raw skill, a lot of the times they would have the ability to fall back on ways to contend, even when they were playing at 80% or 70% and they weren't fully hot. And that's something that I don't see a lot of now. I don't see a lot of tactical play coming out of the North American side. Do you think that there have been similar or maybe even like further regressions when it comes to North American CS now? Do you see parallels to the older style, or do you think it's a bit of a different beast in terms of where they've gone?
I feel like trying to shadow box NA styles right now with EU styles has me believing that EU is stronger once again. That what you're saying is correct. I think that's a really good take of yours, that we have seen a regression in how they probably really can't fall back on anything anymore. Like if they're just not hitting their shots or their comms seem a little off for the day, it feels like they fall very quickly off a precipice. And EU teams, when I watch EU teams, I can consistently outline what the win condition in a round is for a lot of these teams. But for NA teams, sometimes I watch them play and I just kind of feel like, okay, someone had to step up this round, and they did. So good for them and good for that individual. But the how replicable the success is round to round feels it's a lot. There's a lot more questions I have for it. So that's so I think that when we come back to integrated play, NA versus EU, I think that it'll light a fire underneath the asses of a lot of North American players because I think they're gonna just get bopped immediately. I think there's a good chance they're just gonna get completely smashed. I think EU has been putting in much more work and it's a much more competitive region right now.
One of the more recent moves that we saw was actually an EU team, despite the fact that it has a significant North American backing. Complexity ended up losing one of their 5 players. Obo has decided to bench himself, and he cited, homesickness essentially, and the fact that he was away for so long. But prior to that, I was actually thinking that as far as representing North America, even though they have, European roots in terms of where they are right now in the world, I thought that Complexity might have a different ability on that because just from the get-go, when they put out all of the marketing material that they did put out, when they announced that they were building the Juggernaut and they're doing all this stuff, and they were assembling the training environments and stuff, they were trying to simulate LAN play with like all the crazy lights and whatnot. I'm not sure if you watched any of the videos that they had when they were showcasing that, but they had some rooms essentially. And, Jason Lego is obviously a very, storied individual, very passionate, and definitely had a lot to say about the kinds of trials and tribulations he wanted to put his players through just in practice to kind of keep them sharp and even when they're not in the environment that they would be in normally when a LAN rolls around, basically trying to remove the LAN jitters as much as possible. And this is before the online era took off at all. This is nothing to do with, this is back in 2019, I think, when the team was first assembled. So I thought that, an owner like Jason Lake and the idea that the team that with an infrastructure like that would probably be the best suited, if we can call them a North American team, to contend with this sort of thing and to keep, essentially keep a head on their shoulders while they're playing online. And it actually kind of reminded me of a different example further back in history when MIBR was still intact as a team. But when they were SK Gaming, they were not finding that much competition in the North American region. And one of the things that I remember hearing about as far as anecdotes shared on, podcasts and whatnot was that Fallen and the guys would all be standing around doing theory for a long time. And it, obviously other teams in history have done this. Big, of course, famous for going into the server and looking up smokes and stuff and trying to line up new utility. That sort of thing, I feel like would help target one of the things that you outlined where you don't have a lot of options to make the days not blend together, to keep things unique. And I feel like maybe an optimized schedule like that would work. Obviously, we won't really be able to see if Complexity will be able to do it, or at least there'll be a question mark anyway, because they now have to search for a 5th player. But what do you think of ways to adapt or fix some issues that you're outlining here? As far as North American teams go, do you think that an approach like what Fallen did back in SK Gaming, what Big have done in terms of not just doing DM and scrims, but also trying to do some sort of theory and maybe some sort of simulated LAN event like what I was talking about with Complexity? What do you think about all these elements? What do you think which teams would be liable to start implementing some of this stuff, and what do you think would help them?
First of all, I would want to say that I think for teams to start implementing more theory and to really just like bring the theory craft to the forefront of their actual game, they would need to take time off from a tournament, because I feel like it's a huge discussion right now that just people are constantly just flooded with tournaments. They like if you're EG, it feels like you have to play every tournament. You if you're Liquid, you have to play every single tournament. Like even though Cologne is not in Cologne, it's still called Cologne, and to dodge that event, there's gonna be some repercussions where people are like, why is EG not playing Cologne? But then it's like their answer is like, well, it's an online event. It feels like every other event. Like literally nothing feels different about this event from another. So they would have to admit that to everyone. First of all, or maybe they don't. Maybe they can get away with it. But in reality, it's kind of true that unless there's something more at stake other than like prize money, like all of these tournaments just feel the same. So for a team to back out of for them to even begin theory crafting, I think they need to take time off. And I think that's usually when teams show their best foot, or they just when they actually take time away, or maybe they didn't get invited to that one tournament, so they had a month to boot camp or they had a month to scrim. And I don't see that happening just because there's just constantly tournaments. So what can they do about it? But to actually answer your question, what teams can benefit from that the most? I think really any team that's not on top can do that. I think I'm trying to see. Wait, how are you trying to frame this around Complexity again?
Oh, the complexity portion of it was simply that they had their own like LAN simulating facility. So they had an area where you'd sit down and it would be like the LAN booths, and it would have flashing lights and maybe some confetti or some crazy stuff. Try to simulate like all the oddities. I think it would have temperature control as well. They could like make it colder or warmer, like maybe more than they would be comfortable with normally, trying to make them out of their comfort zone of just sitting down boot camping or practicing in a real facility and make it more like a real LAN event. So stuff like that. I mean, obviously not every team has a facility like that, but I was trying to give that as an example of ways that they could try to get themselves out of that, the rut that they're in mentally, where every day feels identical, like you were saying.
Yeah, so I think that kind of facility is really interesting, and there's a lot of options you can or a lot of routes you can go with that. But to bring it back to, I guess, what other teams are capable of doing without that, it's really just integrating into your regiment, your practice regime, to just do more server work, to try to study something else. Like I'm saying that I said earlier in this that it would be really nice if some of these teams just branched out and looked at some of the strategies that other teams were using and maybe stole a little bit more from the other scenes. Because before, let's say 2 years ago, every team was kind of trying to just play like Astralis, and everyone was just copying them more or less, and it kind of was like a top-down thing where it's just how well can you copy them to an extent, but also integrate a little bit of your own strategy and innovation. And actually, I remember a lot of IGLs would look towards like tier 3 teams. Like they would look towards the best South African team at the time, or they'd look towards some Asian teams to find some new CT side setups. They would try to integrate those kinds of things. I think now more than ever would be a good time to try to do that, because the regions now are going their separate directions in terms of play style. So you would need to just really use the time in practice, like 3 days, to just say, hey, we're going to practice the Vici Gaming nuke defense or something, and just try to integrate this. And maybe we're only going to use this 2 rounds out of our next nuke game. But because we have this in our back pocket, it'll throw the other team for a loop, and then it can really catch people off by surprise. And I've been watching a lot of these tournaments, and maybe like there's a little bit of innovation here and there, like, okay, wow, that was a cool aggressive push or something like that. But I also kind of feel like when I'm watching it, sometimes it's just like they just look like they felt like doing that. I don't really know if there was a lot of theory behind that kind of play. I just feel like I'm taking things for granted also, and maybe that's just kind of everyone at their jobs right now. But yeah, I think they just got to keep spicing things up. I think they need to. The thing is that these teams have such a big organizational staff. They have the coach, they have the manager, they have the analyst, they sometimes have the assistant coach. Like Cloud9, it feels like they have like 5 people on that roster or something. Like some of these teams have that, but it feels like what are some of these teams actually doing with those resources, if not just like really small things. I think EG though is actually on top of something. I feel like their macro decisions have been just like a little bit uncharacteristic sometimes, but it's been effective in a way. But I haven't like noted and tracked it close enough to say like, was that just around here or there, or that they tried something different. But I think that's maybe partially responsible for their success, the fact that they do throw teams for a loop just a little bit here and there. Like I feel like sometimes their procedures in mid-round setups are like really like, okay, that was a weird way to play it, and I feel like that defies sometimes normal Counter-Strike logic. But like that might just be me giving them more credit than they deserve too. Like it's hard for me to tell. It's not. I'm just gonna say this. It's not as apparent as it was before we went to online. Like before we got 6 months deep into COVID, that these teams had like I'm just like finding scraps here now. It's like that looked okay. Like was that new or was it not new? Like I can't even really tell anymore. So like as opposed to 6 months ago, where it's like, wow, that was a cool strat. I could tell,
So I'm going to throw you, from my perspective, an impossible question, or a question with pretty much no answer that I can imagine would be satisfying. But in the history of pretty much every esport game that I've followed, and I think this anecdote will probably ring true with a lot of the audience members as well, North American teams have generally not been the best. As long as there's integration with Europe and obviously Asia, just Asia, the whole continent, the whole idea of North Americans being top dogs is very rare. And if it does happen, it's not for as long as historically Europe, or especially in Counter-Strike, but in other games like Korea, China, for example, League of Legends, of course. These nations, these areas of the world have generally dominated for longer and much more emphatically than what North America has in terms of its track record. I want to ask you why. What would possibly make North American Counter-Strike, or more broadly speaking, if you want to tackle the more broad one, what would possibly make that, like, what kind of differences are we talking about here? Because there have been a lot of answers down the years to this question because everybody wants to know. But what do you think?
I think this is like a systemic problem with North America. I think there's a few things, and I think the most obvious answer that I'll cop out on is the fact that our population size is simply smaller than China, and that our population size is simply smaller than Europe. So there's less players to draw from. But then that being said, it's like how are Australia so good when they're literally just taking from their own country? You know, how is this? But the thing is that what needs to be kept in mind is that they're playing in a very competitive Nordic or Scandinavian region that has Sweden, Finland themselves. I'm sure I'm missing a couple countries there, but then they can also play other parts of Europe too that aren't as northern too, like kind of just more central European countries too, and the ping is just fine. So they don't really have to. So they can basically just keep fighting against better competition, and it's like fighting in the hyperbolic time chamber in like Dragon Ball or something. I mean, you're just getting so much more experience so much quicker because you're fighting against better competition. Like anyone that bubbles to the top in Europe is going to be better because there's just more people playing in Europe. There's more people playing in China. I think of Dota because that's really the other esport that I follow most closely that has international play. And I think that with Dota, it was kind of like always, is this China's year or is this the West's year? And the West was pretty much just Europe, other than one TI where Evil Geniuses won, and half of that roster wasn't even North American. Like it had a Pakistani kid, and it had I think a European on it also. It was just a Canadian, 3 Americans, and 1 Pakistani guy. So they still had to outsource a little bit there. And I think after sheer population size, I think that the mentality in North America is actually pretty bad in terms of what is valued here. Because in America, I think that raw ability is just so highly touted that a lot of people have the star mentality from America. And that's kind of the American ideal of the individual over the rest of over the rest. And I think that is kind of why that's why Denmark really succeeds, because they're like just a super socialist country, and it's kind of been ingrained for them for a long time that value the greater good, value the team, value the society over the self, and then the self will be rewarded because of the society's success. It's that they will, even if it's subconscious, even though these players want to be stars over there in China and they want to be stars in Denmark, they still value the fact that they're a cell in a working body as opposed to the star. Like they're the Americans because of sports and because of movies, because of like, think of all of our like highest earning people in America. They're just like glorified to an extent that everyone wants to be them. Like, everyone has, God, am I really going to talk about him on this podcast? Everyone thinks about like Elon Musk or something like that. And then it's like, this guy's just so glorified for just making a lot of money, but like, he kind of just sucks in every way possible. So it's like other than some of the ideas he's had and some of the companies that he's like helped, I wouldn't even say founded, but he's helped, that he's been a director on. It's kind of tough to argue that this guy is actually really great, but everyone glorifies him because he's rich and he made it, he's famous. And I think that's kind of like, that trickles down to how a lot of people in America want to view themselves. They want to be the successful guy who's famous for being successful. They don't even know, like, what has he actually accomplished? Like, that's up for debate. And like, how much is he just like kind of ridden off of other people's success or coattails? Like, okay, he did PayPal, which is impressive, but other things, like there's like, whatever. I'm not going to go too deep into what I think about him, but just, it all trickles down to how Americans really view these kinds of people, that they see the star, they see the Stewie 2K, they see the uh, they see the Elige, they see the who are some other players. They see the fraud from like 1.6 days and how the team was just built around him, and they want to be that guy. They want to be that guy more than they want to be any other player. And there's less of those excellent support players. There's less of those people that just buy into the system, and it's kind of everyone wants to just be the guy. They want to be the guy in every given round, and that's why the style of a lot of North American teams has. It's almost like it has to be this default centric style because everybody wants a chance to be the hero at some point in the game. Even if it's not to always just be another cog in the machine, they want to be the reason. They want to be why.
Would another example of this sort of mentality coming to the surface be in the, we'll say, general undervaluing of the in-game leader as a role, in your opinion?
Yeah, I can get with that. I think that I don't know why North America. Well, North America kind of lost a pretty big step when they lost Dazed and Steel. I think that kind of cut off the lineage pretty hard in terms of what kind of info that those two could have passed on to more people. Because it's not like Denmark is producing like. Well, Denmark does have a lot of IGLs. Let me pick another region. It's not like Germany is like creating like tons of IGLs or anything like that. It's kind of like Tabson just had to take up the role, and then he just has run with it since then. And it feels like they have a really good support staff behind them. And I'm sure Tabson's doing a lot as well there, but it's kind of like when you lose two big IGLs in the scene, such as Dazed and Steel, you lose the influence that they will have in the future on other players and how they'll be able to develop people in the future. So now it puts the onus on the newer generation for creating a kind of style or a system that will take a lot of these players into the future and that they can pass down on. And like other than like I haven't really seen any great IGLs come out of North America in the past 3 years. I think the best IGL in the past few years might, like, other than people who just kind of had to take it up, like, I'm not going to, like, I guess I could put Stewie, but I feel like he just kind of had to do it at one point or another. It's not like he really love or, like, want to go into the scene being an IGL. So I guess, like, Sheikh Zula or JT, but JT's not even North American. He's South African. So Sheikh Zula maybe has been a good IGL, but, like, we can see how gutted Triumph looks now that they lost Grim. So then I think that draws into that puts the question out there, like, was Sheikh Zula actually a great IGL or was Grim just a god? Because now Triumph just loses everything, and it looks pretty bad. So it's tough to say. And I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt here. I'm not trying to chastise him or denounce Sheikh Zula. I think he's doing a great job, and I want him to keep doing what he's doing. But I think what you're saying, that the IGL is not as highly valued, I think that's pretty real. I think that you look at the metrics for judging is someone a star or not, and I don't know, like Sheikh Zula like follower count is much lower than say Moose, and Moose was on Envy for a bit, and he was on some decent teams like United. But I think like it's just kind of interesting, like. I myself and many other people in the North American scene have kept giving a Moose a pass, but like I'm asking the question right now: is Sheikh Zula a good IGL? And it's like what like that I think that explains it right there. That I feel like I should probably, if I were from another region, I'd probably be like Sheikh Zula is a great IGL. I wouldn't even back talk him at all. But because I'm from NA, I feel like was it the star doing it? You know.
Well, it's a question that has to be asked anyway, because of course, when you look at Team Liquid kicking Nitro after, bringing in Grim from Triumph, the question has to be asked that when Nitro starts to drop off in terms of individual performance, and when Team Liquid as a whole stop fragging out of their minds, at what point does the IGL's responsibility come up? And maybe that's a default assumption on the behalf of some of the players in North America that, oh, when we're not fragging as much and, the IGL as well is suffering in terms of stats, but, he's also not calling us out of this hole that we're in. He's also not finding a way to offset that. Right. And maybe they're more likely in that sense, just as a theory, to, put him lower on the totem pole. And the other, examples of this are obviously the endless dance that appears to be happening between Daps and Stanislaw. The idea that one goes in, the other one comes out, and so on and so forth. And so far it hasn't happened. Obviously, it looks like it won't this time around. But the idea that I feel like Daps is one of those cases where I've heard from the circles that I swim in, very undervalued member of the team, is really good at, you got an eye for talent, can build up a roster, but for whatever reason seems to struggle to get them across the finish line in the big stakes tournaments. And at that point they bring in perhaps somebody like Stanislaw to, finish the job. Essentially, that's what happened with HenryG into Evil Geniuses. And now, who knows who's going to come in and replace him on Gingy. I'm not sure if that's been announced yet, but whether or not they'll do a fine job as an IGL, operating within the remnants of Daps' system is yet to be determined. And yet it seems so frequently members like Daps and Stanislaw and now Nitro have been shafted out when maybe you wouldn't necessarily think to remove the IGL before you start removing some of the other players. Team Liquid is a little bit of a different case, I suppose, because who do you really cut in that particular example? But it does make you wonder, I imagine. So would you say that in that sense, when we have this example, it seems a very long history of IGLs not being as valued, and then you mentioned the iBuyPower ban, removing two of the more experienced veteran IGLs callers in the North American scene, completely, short-circuiting any potential professional development that they could provide to other players who would come up under them, and then be able to learn from that experience of having what it's like to have a veteran caller, veteran IGL, and learning how to do that themselves as well, being able to sort of soak some of that up by osmosis and then maybe put their own style on it. Would you say that because of the fact that we have so few IGLs that fit the bill, that maybe that is not only like the obvious corollary would be that maybe that's why one of the reasons why our strategies are not faring out so well, why our tactical play is not as high at level as some of Europe's teams, but maybe it's also one of those perpetuating cycles. Like, is it going to be able to get better when you don't already value IGLs? Who wants to be an IGL? And, is that some sort of Gordian knot that is very difficult to untangle? Or do you see perhaps a better way to resolve this issue as far as IGLs go?
I think the way to resolve it is for the mentality of players to change, in that they need to allow themselves to be coachable. I think that's something that, like, there are a lot of people in the North American scene that understand Counter-Strike at a very deep level, that they understand the ins and outs of how a strategy should look start to finish, how a default should look. There's enough resources out there now that people have done their homework, and there's some people in the scene that, like, there's probably, like, I want to say at least 7 people in North America that could definitely be a top tier NA coach. But the question then comes in, how can they command the respect out of the players? And I think that a lot of people, maybe they don't, maybe they just can't, maybe they won't be able to do that because they're not as charismatic as they would need to be in order to have those kind of leadership qualities. But if the players themselves just decided to, with an open mind, allow a coach in, or an analyst or wherever, what kind of role these guys take up in their organization, just allow them to have a really serious say in what that person thinks needs to be changed, and run with it for a bit and forego a tournament. Like, say, just skip a tournament here, bring in XYZ coach, and let him dictate the practices. Let him change the mentality of the team and be willing to experiment. I think that a lot of the positions that players choose for themselves sometimes, and the kind of roles they want on a default or the roles they want in a strategy, don't actually fit their skill sets. I think that it's a comfort thing that a lot of players kind of just need to, like, if you're coming up in the scene, sure, like, if you're, the 15th best team in North America, sure, just play what you want to play. Like, I couldn't care less. But if you're the 5th best team in North America and you've been just hard stuck there and you want to actually progress on this roster, the only thing an organization can do to move forward and try to elevate themselves is to either cut you, or it's to change up kind of the support staff. But I feel like many times now, a support staff member has changed, but nothing about that team has felt any different. It's very rare when I see a coach actually change the outlook of a team. When I see Zeus join Evil Geniuses, I notice the improvements very quickly. I notice what's changed for them. But when say like an I'm a Pet figure joins a team, I don't really like it. 100 Thieves didn't look any better. Like they really didn't. They looked. I think they probably lost a step actually. So I feel like, and I know that I'm a Pet is a really smart fella and he does a lot of work, but I just don't feel like he commands the respect. And that also just the burden falls on the players as well. They gotta let him in. They gotta let him say what he wants to say. Or maybe I'm giving too much credit to some of these coaches and some of these people. But if I were to take up a role on a team and I were given just full command of it, I would probably change up like many positions for different players. I would probably like if I were to switch up Gen G right now, I would say like automatic get off the op. You're gonna be the late round closer player. Som definitely gonna be entry fragger. Bentet just lurk. I mean I think that's like not too far off from where they are right now in terms of what their roles are, but like there are things I would change about some of these teams and their structure in terms of their play style. I don't even think you need to switch the players. I just think the way that they're playing some of the positions and spots needs to be, they just need to shake it up a little bit more. And sometimes you have to, it's kind of like once people make it to a high level in this game, they're very afraid of like giving up one step like sometimes you need to like take a step down, or take a step back to see the greater picture so that you can take 2 steps forward. And I think that's the main concern for a lot of these teams, that they're not willing to take that one step back to like slingshot them forward.
Well, you mentioned roles as one of the examples of things that you would be potentially interested in shaking up. And I actually wanted to ask you and generally pose the question more broadly speaking. The idea of roles in Counter-Strike has never been legislated. It's never been written down. It's never really been fully defined for my money. Like I've never seen, for example, obviously it's a apples and oranges example, but you referenced Dota 2. I've never seen people say second position, third position. I've never seen people, go to League of Legends and say mid, top, jungle. There's nothing like that for Counter-Strike. There's the idea of an opper, that's your sniper. Okay, you got your entry fragger, you got your second in. And especially on T side, it seems a little bit more reasonable. You could say lurker, you could say, support player, throws the nades, helps the setup, comes in third or something like that. It might be a little bit easier on T side, but when it comes to CT side, what do you got? You got A anchor, B anchor, mid, rotate, op. What do you like? It's much more nebulous. It's much harder to nail down. Obviously, you've got IGL as another role, and that doesn't necessarily make an impact on the server itself. It doesn't necessarily dictate what kind of position they take up in the team. It's just an additional stat. What do you think could be done to maybe help out maybe on a subconscious level, but also help the average viewer at home appreciate more about the inner workings of these teams, and particularly maybe create more of an underlying expectation for players and as well as analysts and such that are coming in and looking at like if this guy's supposed to be the entry fragger and he's losing all of his duels, maybe he's not doing a good job at his position. If we were to do something like that where we really nail down the criteria for all of these roles and try to establish some sort of standard, what kind of effect do you think that would have when it comes to evaluating player performance and looking at it and kind of changing the narrative when it comes to whether or not a player is doing well? Because we've all seen the posts and undervaluing entry fraggers in terms of their stats, but the stats don't tell the whole picture. If they have an entry fragger sigil next to their name and you mouse over, it says, oh, entry fragger first in. Maybe that helps to color the analysis. What do you think?
I think that this is a little bit complicated because I think it straight up changes round by round. I think that there's not always, so the way I like to see it sometimes is kind of like who creates in around the win conditions for a team and who like tightens up the losing conditions. So this kind of, for me, because I kind of came from Dota, I didn't really come from Dota. I did CS first, but then in college, I didn't really follow CS as closely because I went to college from like around when Source was dying to when CSGO was starting. So in all honesty, like I didn't really follow CSGO at its birth because I just whatever. But I watched a lot of Dota is all I'm trying to say. And when I watched a lot of Dota, there's a position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 means is who's getting the farm priority. And the farm priority, just kind of like League of Legends, it's a similar concept in that the AD carry gets the most farm priority. The like the off lane. I think the mid player kind of gets the second most farm priority. The third guy is like
It'd be the
off
top
laner.
lane generally.
Top lane, yeah. So that guy gets a lot of priority too. Then the jungler, then the support, right? And I feel like that's a way you can view Counter-Strike, but it has to be on a round by round basis, which makes it really tough to craft some of these narratives, because in some rounds, EG is trying to set up Cirque. And so he would be the position 1 in a round because they're going to boost him. They're going to throw a flash for him. He's going to throw his own smoke, and then they're going to try to like let him peer over it so he can get that first kill of the round. And then the guy that's on his head, that he's on top of, like let's say he's actually boosting like on overpass or something like that. He's on that guy's head. It's not like that guy is like the position 5 always. Sometimes that guy is the position 2 because if Cirque dies, then that guy has to take the next fight. And so some of these resources that are being dedicated towards Cirque would be Ethan's, like these are sometimes Ethan's roles, or this is also utility that'll help Ethan out. And so I feel like on a round by round basis, you can separate that. You can say that, okay, Cirque in this round was the position 1, but it was actually Stanislaw who was the position 5 because he was just kind of playing the A anchor guy, playing really far back, just making sure that they didn't just rush him down or anything like that. So he's getting the least resources towards him. But then the very next round, it might be Ethan who's set up, because Ethan on a lot of EG's anti-ecos, I noticed that he gets like kind of a little bit of help. He gets set up to get into that bomb site to clear it out a lot of the time. So it makes Ethan look like an eco fragger, but I mean nowadays eco frags are so important that I don't really take that away from him or anything like that, because people are so good with deagles and stuff now. But Ethan would be the position 1 in the next round. So I feel like having those positions really spelled out sometimes just leads to a little bit more confusion, because sometimes I'll point out to a more casual friend or fan, mostly friends, that I'm like, like MOTM on Cloud9 is the entry fragger or whatever, so he's gonna run first and they're gonna throw flashes for him. And on one team, like MOTM, the MOTM player is Xantarez, and Xantarez, like they make sure that Xantarez, when he goes in, like he gets a lot of resources because they don't want him to die for nothing. They don't want him to just pass on without really doing some damage. But another team, like say when MIBR uses Taco, like you're just like, what the hell was supposed to set up Taco there? Like I don't even know what that was supposed to be. So, and then it's like, so in different cases, like I wouldn't really call MOTM versus Taco versus Xantarez like I wouldn't call them all the ones. I would say like in this one, Taco's like the 4 because he kind of got like the short end of the stick, that he had to just run in. They had no more utility left, and then he just had to try to look for a fight. So I would consider the 1 to be like the guy that's running in after him or something like that. Like basically using Taco as the bait there. So entry fragger in Taco's sense is a very shitty role. But in Xantarez's sense, because Big threw a really good flash play and exec to help set him up, Xantarez is the 1 here. He's the person that's supposed to create for them because they use the utility and the resources to set him up. And then MOTM would be like a 2 or something like that, because like he gets a lot of resources, like Cloud9 throw really good flashes, but he still has to jump through a smoke in this strategy. Like that's kind of part of the strategy, that he has to just while out jumping through that thing. And then someone like Floppy or maybe Sonic in this round would be the 1 because they get to be the 2nd or 3rd guy in. So it's tough, is what I'm saying. It's like it's tough to try to enhance the viewer experience with more defined roles, because not always, like that person isn't always going to be like have the same priority in a team.
So maybe it would be something more reserved for like a post-round analysis or something like that. Like
yeah,
might be able to help color the sort of narrative or something like that, craft a little bit more of an accurate tell to what each individual team is, and maybe attenuate some of the immediate reactions people have when they look at the stats and they find the person who bottom fragged and say, minus that guy plus somebody else, all that stuff. Is a way to level up the discourse in a sense, in theory anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think CS and its obsession with stats has really ruined a lot of the chances for up and coming players that, like I'm saying, like if he's the position 3 on the team, and he's never set up and he excels at that, or like let's say he's the position, I'll do a better example, like a Zipnix in North America is very hard to pick out and be like, this guy is something else. Like this guy is a next generation talent who can just make something out of absolutely nothing because all of his opportunities suck. Like Zipnik's opportunity, like Zipnik wins a lot of clutches, but he loses a lot of clutches too. Because sometimes the situation he's in is a 1v3 and they know really where he is, and then he has no opportunities. It's when he has that space. It's when they actually kind of did create for him in a round that they could send Dupree and Majiskin on some crazy entry path, on some like crazy Astralis war path that they just like threw the smoke, flash exec and everything, and then Zipnix has some space to work with. But in North America, the guy, that fifth guy in, and I can say this because I've been this guy on some teams where it's just like, or on a strategy really, it's just like, okay, they knew I was throwing the flashes from this position, so they know I'm gonna be this last guy out here. And when my two entry fraggers died, I'm pretty much just shit out of luck from this position. And so, but let's say I convert 1 out of 3 1v3s, like that's a crazy amount of times, right? But then so people will be like, wow, he won that round and that's sick. But like the amount of opportunities I have to actually show that off is so little. Or any player, I would say, any clutcher in that circumstance has so few opportunities to show that kind of playoff that people will just look at the stats and they'll just say, all right, well, Zipnix, dude had 62 ADR, went 18 and 20. Like, I'm not gonna try to pick this guy up. Why would I look for this guy? You know. But in actuality, those 18 kills he got were mega impactful. One of them was a 1v3. You know, like 3 of those 18 kills, and none of them were eco frags. You know, something like that.
So you actually did mention quite heavily, you leaned on the example of MOTM and such in Cloud9, and notably, obviously, the rosters being shaken up pretty heavily. You also alluded earlier to it, the fact that they've got maybe 5 or 6 more people on some rosters than on some rosters they have in their support staff. So they've got it going on over there in that Cloud9 camp, and they've been announcing the roster moves so far, building up the Colossus. How do you feel about the other signings that they've done? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say anything bad about Alex, but Woxic was a bit of a X factor, a little bit of a question mark ever since his Mousesports departure.
Right. So Henry in an interview also said something along the lines of, like he's not going to pick up people that he thinks have bad attitudes, or like they want to make sure there's no head cases on the team. So I have reason to believe that Woxic was kind of just deflated because of the online CS and Mousesports just failing across the board. Like that was a pretty catastrophic chain of failures for Mousesports. Like last place in like, I don't know, something like 5 events straight, just something terrible, right? So I can understand it from Woxic's side. That's just like, okay, it's hard to believe in that team at that point for what we are now just have to accept as the reality of the situation, that we're not at LAN. We are playing online. We need, like, things need to change because this is our reality now. And so I don't actually have as much against Woxic. Like, I think Woxic is such a game-breaking player at times when he wants to be, that if you mold him into a system that Alex creates, and I think what's going to help this team out a lot is the honeymoon period. I think that will really elevate Woxic. I think that's going to make Alex look really good also. And I'm curious about their next 2 pickups, because I think right now with their roster, you want one more veteran player. You want one more vet, so that, like, a really good communicating vet. Like the Chris J type, like the NBK type, like the RP, maybe RPK, kind of like Apex type, you know, like if I just go down the line, like the Tarek of the team, you know, you kind of need a guy that's just gonna lift morale in the server and be like kind of a glue guy. You need a glue guy on that team right now. So I think they're looking for that moving forward. And I'm not sure what they're gonna look for a 5th. Maybe like a super clutch player. I think they need a really clutch player, and they need like a glue guy. And sometimes those can be the same guy, but more times often than not, that's not really the case, because the glue guy is usually the guy that's a little bit more selfless for the team. The guy that's like he sees the strategy unfolding and he's like, yo, with this time, we're gonna see a timing here. We gotta run in. Like, guys, we need to take control of this part of the map right now. The clutch guy is never that guy. The clutch guy is always the guy that's like, let me be methodical about this. Let me weigh the decision. Let me see if I will live throughout this. Whereas the Tarek glue guy is the guy that's just, let me pounce on this opportunity. And the clutcher guy is gonna bait him. So That's my predictions for where they're headed. And okay, if I had to give like letter grades, I think Alex is like an A+ signing. That's like the best IGL captain you could have got for the team on the free open market. I think Woxic is probably B, like a B+, and I think Mezzi is like solid C-. So I think they need a couple like B+ to A rated signings for me.
Well, we'll find out somewhat soon, I think, right? They're set to debut in Flashpoint 2, I guess now, right? So hopefully we get something good out of that.
Yeah, should be a couple months. We'll see what they got going for us.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the LAN reactivation of Woxic will occur, and we'll all look silly for doubting him ever. But one of the reasons why I wanted to get your brains, pick your brains on Cloud9 specifically, is because it seems like with the fact that they're publicizing player salaries and they're being very heavily focused on the PR side of social media announcements and driving all of that traffic to their websites, to merch, to players' Twitter feeds and stuff like that. I think Mezzi was doing like a giveaway I saw on Twitter at some point of his own signed jerseys, both from Gamer Legion and Cloud9. And the whole idea is like, if you want to win, you got to follow me. So they're pulling out all the tricks, right? They're trying to get everybody in on the whole hype bandwagon, as it were. And do you think that this kind of approach, I mean, obviously to some extent giveaways have already existed in esports teams, but when it comes to North America, obviously like the big difference is the fact that they're publicizing the player contract details, especially like signing, I don't know if they were signing bonuses, but it was sort of like total value of the contract was pulled into one value and they put that out there, they publicized that. So do you think that this kind of approach would help any of the things that we were talking about earlier, help attenuate the fact that North America has a bit of a less of a respect for IGLs and stuff, but then they see that you were talking about earlier, the whole idea of the star, the glitz and glamour, the idea that you've got this guy who's really popular or really rich. Well, then they look at their, one of the IGLs in North America now, Alex, and they look at his contract and they see how much money he's making. They're like, wow, maybe there is something to it. Like it's kind of playing to what they already think, playing to their existing biases. But do you think it'll end up being positive for the scene overall?
I'll start with the micro first, in that NA players should see these contracts and think like, oh wow, so there is a there's a drought for IGLs. There's not too many good ones out there. So hopefully that makes a couple more people take up the role. But for the overall scene, I think that this is something that should have happened a long time ago. How do I get it? I think that revealing salaries has something that has always been kind of a capitalist taboo, in terms of people, like the only people that don't want you to reveal your salaries should be your employers, or should be the higher people up the chain, because once to use Marxist term, once the proletariat understands the value he has to the ruling elite, or even the bourgeoisie, like then they can start to take control a little bit more. Then they can start to recognize their own value. Then they can start to make terms, unionize in a way that puts them more at an even footing for themselves. Also, it shouldn't surprise players that they're making 1/3 that their teammate is making, because their teammate has proved to the organization that what that player can bring that team is more valuable than what they have. And people should accept that fact. And what I think for the future of esports, and actually I just think the future of capitalist society, I think everyone should just reveal their salaries. Honestly, I think that's like the most equitable thing to do. And I think that moving forward, that would probably help out a lot in terms of just like making sure that workers in every field on the planet recognize that what they are doing should be recognized and compensated financially in a way that it probably isn't right now. And I think that could lead to actually pretty overall excellent global change. So I am a fan. I'm a huge fan of people revealing their salaries. And until I maybe reach those upper echelons of the ruling people, and then I start to worry as an administrator what the contracts are, because it's going to come out of maybe my pocketbook. Like, until I reach that point, I will continue to vouch for this. And I want to bring up this really quick. Another call out for Henry. Why has he revealed every other player? Why is he revealing all his player salaries, but he hasn't revealed his own salary? Can someone explain that to me? Like, if he's trying to be so transparent, which is a word he won't stop using, but he won't even tell us his. Like, come on. Like, where's it at, Henry? Come on. Like, what's going on over there?
Well, one of the main things that I've seen as a counter argument that is generally, I mean, odds are it's sourced from the higher ups anyway, as they're trying to argue in favor of keeping it a little bit more hush hush, is that it'll sow discontent between the players themselves. And as you pointed out, I think it makes more sense to keep everything open, because the argument is, well, if everybody's open about it, it becomes less of a social moray, a social taboo. The idea that, oh, he's making X amount more or less than me, sort of decoupling the sense of self-worth with pay, and the idea that, like, now that you have an understanding of market value for your role, for your position, for your skill level at your tier, you can leverage that for more or less. And I actually think, personally, I don't know what you think of this, it might end up leading to a market correction, where I've seen it, or I've heard it talked about constantly, that players may even be being overpaid at the current state of where things are in terms of profitability of the scene. Counter-Strike teams don't always end up in the black; they usually end up in the red, from what I understand. So the idea that they're not actually earning enough profit to keep up the idea of paying the players at their current value, if everybody knows each other's value, and we see a market correction as a result of that and other things that have been happening, like the pandemic, maybe the idea is, it doesn't hurt as much when everybody's sort of being lowered down a peg, because everything's transparent. So, like you said, hopefully it ends up starting something big.
Yeah, I would, the counter to like sowing dissent among and discontent among players is that if you go up to Mezzi right now and you say, hey, you're making 11K a month, Alex is making 43K a month, is Mezzi really, like, is a person in Mezzi's shoes really going to be like, fucking shit, like, what the girl, like, this is not fair? It's like, come on, dude, like, be honest right now. Like, you do not deserve like half of what Alex has. Like, there's no world in which I feel like you should even believe that. When they become like nickel and dimey about it, that's when you bring it up to your org owners, or like your the great higher management. If you think it's unfair, you should be taking that up with your management, as opposed to like pitting that against each other. That's like the reaction that a worker should have in these kind of situations. That being said, it doesn't always work like that.
Well, now that we're back on the topic, sort of player behavior, I did want to finally touch on that idea that you brought up towards the beginning, that you hinted at. We talked about 10 a.m. games. So what's going on with that? Like, I mean, we're talking about the attitude of players. We're talking about whether or not they're taking things seriously, whether or not they're valuing the right things, whether or not they're ready to sacrifice for the whole of the team and not worry so much about their own personal selves. And here they are on Twitter saying, fuck 10 a.m. games, that is all, or whatever Stewie said. As a layman, I was not fully kept up on every single tweet that went out and every single response here and there. But as somebody who watches the scene a bit more closely than I do, what's your take on the recent controversy about it? And how does it factor into the whole feeling that there's nonstop games, nonstop tournaments, and now they're even eating into our mornings? What the hell?
So I'll give my take on the whole situation, because I wasn't really public about it on Twitter, because I feel like I couldn't even explain it in the 280 characters that I'm allotted there. I didn't want to make a thread. I didn't want to do that. So my opinion is that the way the ecosystem is set up right now is in such a way that that's time that players are very used to not having to play. Like, that's, if they're like, knowing that players start practice usually at 11, and that's usually server time. That's usually them not even having to play. Like, that's them just showing up and sitting and listening to their coach and IGL talk to them, right? Or them theory crafting a little bit. So usually around 10 is probably 10:30 is where they get a little bit of warm up in. Maybe they eat a breakfast at 10 or something like that. I could understand it. I understand that the players are upset about it, because when something throws off your schedule like that, you're gonna complain. Like, but that being said, I mean, I knew for CS Summit that I had to get to the studio at 5 a.m. every morning. And for me, 5 a.m. every morning is 2 a.m. Hawaii time. And I was just getting off of a broadcast where I was doing stuff for DreamHack. Like, I had to do some stuff for them. Like, it was like I had to basically, like, I had to change my sleep schedule very quickly, and I had to just adapt to it. and I think I did a pretty good job. Like I don't think my quality of myself on the broadcast really lost anything because of that. Because I knew in advance that I would have to do that. So I know how I have to, what it takes for me to shift my sleep schedule. So the 2 points are just like, they knew in advance. They knew a month in advance that they had to be up for that time. So that should have been in their routine, that they should have known whatever it takes to do, they should have been able to do it. That being said, I don't think that it really was completely fair to them that they had to wake up at that time. But that being said, it's much more difficult for a broadcast who is running 3 EU games, then they have to run these NA games, and they're trying to make it all on one Twitch stream, line up in such a way that works for them and doesn't just destroy the casters, because ESL is like probably like kind of over. They're like really stretching their casters thin on this one. Like they're like, I don't even know, this 3-person thing where it's like a host kind of person and then 2 cat, like it's kind of awkward for from what I've been hearing and like seeing, and just I'm not a fan of it personally. Like I get it, it might be good if these games were like 0 stakes or something like that, and so I almost just like have to treat it like as such, that these games have very little stakes, because the way that they're stretching this broadcast makes it feel like that in a way. Like why are HenryG, Hugo, and Stunna right now doing a South American and Asia games like after broadcasting for like 9 hours before? That just feels ridiculous to me. But
I'll tell you what, it's probably been banging for all the viewers who are constantly complaining about downtime. And they're like, when's the next event? When's the next event? Well, I can wake up at 6 a.m. my time, see an event going on, stay in bed for an hour or so, chill out, oh yeah, some CS. And then, when I decide it's time to turn off the lights and go to bed at 10 p.m., I look at the phone and hey, there's still CS running. Wow, I wonder how they're doing that.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
Yeah, it's good for somebody, but it definitely doesn't seem reasonable for the casters. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. So my biggest complaint here, I think if I had to take up an argument with anybody, it would just probably be the scheduling of all of this. So that would be on the production side of things. I think that's the biggest culprit here for this debacle. That being said, I feel like if you know that far in advance that you have to play an official, you should be geared up for it as a player. Like NBA player or like MLB players have to play double headers sometimes. Like what the hell is that? Like you have to play 9 innings, then you have to play 9 more innings when you're used to just playing 1 game. Like that stuff is so hard. And when you have to like the travel schedule, like dude, I can't even imagine how some of these players that are complaining about 10 a.m. games would act if they were just thrust into the NBA and they had to like back-to-back games where they had to go to one like they had to travel from say like Southern California all the way to like Oklahoma, and then they had to play a game the very next day. Like what would they say? Like what is their reaction to that? But NBA players, like, they don't really talk about it. They're pretty cool with it because these dudes they're pros and they've been doing it forever. And doing something forever doesn't mean that it's necessarily right in the grand scheme of things. And people are trying to move away from back-to-backs in the NBA and other leagues like that. Like, get rid of those kinds of just high load, high intensity weeks for professionals. But at the same time, like, come on, dude, it's a 10 a.m. game. Like, it's like that's the, like, you're gonna get no sympathy from anyone. I'll tell you that. You're just digging yourself a hole for that. Like, as a personality, like, if you want to build up your brand as a player, you would probably just, I mean, you should probably just not comment on that, or just perform in the server. Like, just own it. Just own in the server. Just overlook those kinds of that kind of adversity. Like, come on, like, if some of these guys like Stewie are idolizing like Michael Jordan, who played through basically having food poisoning in a game, like, what the hell is that, right? Like, it's just a tweet, though. At the end of the day, it's just a tweet, and like,
yeah, just blowing off steam in some ways, right?
Yeah, like I get it. Like, just talk to your sports psychologist instead, though, right? Like, you guys got those. Speak to your therapist or something.
Yeah. Gather the whole team around, say, all right, team, we're here to play, but fuck 10 a.m. games. Don't tweet. That's all. All right, let's go.
Like, yeah. I don't know. I don't mind that we brought this up on here, but I find like things like Twitter stuff, like just the fact that that became the news for the day as opposed to the results of the games was just like, so I just find it really funny. I just find that really funny.
Well, I guess it speaks to, in a sense, the idea that every event, every game, every tournament, it's all the same. It's blending together. But hey, somebody tweeted, let's take a look at that, right?
Yeah, the situation now for us has just become, let's talk about everything but the games, like, at this point. And I don't blame anybody for that. I don't blame anybody. It's hard to stay focused on some of these matches when it's like that match for between Liquid and EG just like did not even really matter. Like that was just like who's going to the higher seeded bracket versus the lower seeded bracket. Like that's why some of these league systems can just suck. Like it felt like that game had so little gravity at all.
As we exit the interview here, I wanted to ask you a few questions about what you were planning on doing as the lockdowns in some places are continuing. Things seem to be continuing online until Flashpoint 2 hopefully rolls around. So any plans between now and then, and anything you want to clue us in on?
Yeah, I'll be working one tournament, which will have its talent release rather soon. So you will be able to catch me in let's say like roughly 3 weeks. So you'll be able to catch me in a handful of weeks, which I will not disclose the exact number of. I will be on yet another analyst desk and talking about some, I'll say Counter-Strike. Yeah, I'll be talking about some Counter-Strike in a few weeks. Other than that, just Flashpoint. I'm really excited for what's going on there. I know that I'm not sure what. I know I can say this, that they're exploring the possibility of a bubble, and I don't think I can say much more than that. And I'm really excited if that pulls through. I know Monty said that publicly, so I know I can say that. And that's it. If that works, it's gonna be so sick. It's gonna be the greatest thing ever. It's gonna be the biggest relief for everybody. Fans of the scenes, the players, the talent. We're all gonna just love that. So I hope that all pulls through. And other than that, a couple other things, just kind of like staying in my lane. Staying in my lane. Probably some more Twitch and YouTube. Like my goal. Okay, so I'll say this. My goal moving forward is just like until my next event, just like a couple of Twitch streams a week, maybe one YouTube video. That's it. That's what you're gonna get out of me. And Twitter content of me posting the things I cook, because that's kind of what I've been focusing on in quarantine. Just getting better at cooking and trying to be healthy with my purchases, going to the farmer's market so that I'm supporting locally and the quality of the food. I'll say this is my, if I were to wait, is this the conclusion of the pod or what?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, we can make it. Okay.
Sure. I don't want to plug myself, but I want to plug your local's farmer's market. Support them, buy your food there, stop going to Walmart for groceries. Stop going to, if possible. I know some people can't because you live in some random areas, but if you can and you have the means to support your farmer's market, you will sometimes splurge. You'll think I spent $70 on things. But I'll tell you something. A tomato from a farmer's market will bring you so much more enjoyment than a tomato. Like, I don't even buy grocery tomatoes. I don't even go to the grocery store to buy tomatoes. But when I see a good farmer's market tomato, it keeps you full longer too. Like when things are natural, like grown without pesticides and GMO, and like they're just more natural, and you know who made it because they're selling it to you now. Like you feel so much better. Your community is benefiting because of it. It's better for the environment because you know that they're doing to the environment is not as bad as like mass producers, and you're fuller for longer. So it will help you lose weight in the long run and just be a healthier human, and you'll feel better because the quality of the food you're eating. Like nutrition is everything, and like the biggest secret for humanity and nutrition is that it's not about the composition of fat and calories and protein and anything like that. If you're eating, as long as it's not to like crazy excess, which you can't even really do. Like I could not even eat like 5 farmers market tomatoes if I tried, because you just get so full. It's the quality of the ingredients. If you like, the biggest example of this, eat a McDonald's hamburger that's like 400 calories. Make your own hamburger that's 400 calories with ingredients you buy at the store. and you're just so much more full. You're satiated for longer. You have a greater sense of satisfaction, and you supported companies that will probably be using your money to reinvest into your community and create a better world. So check out the farmers market. That's my plug.
Bon appetit.